And welcome everyone. This is Peggy Hall from thehealthyamerican.org. Be sure that you sign up at thehealthyamerican.org to get the free newsletter, because that's where I send out all the action steps. And I have an Orange County patriot with me today, Brian Murphy. Brian and I met at a Board of Supervisors meeting. I think that's where we first met, Brian. And then
That's
all through
right.
the summer, you've been coming to the beach church and all of the events. And so I brought Brian on today, and he is going to tell you all about his background. I think you'll find it very interesting, especially given our current situation. He is an expert in data and research and everything that is impacting your life right now. He is a freedom fighter appearing before the Board of Supervisors. He speaks at the Beach Church in San Clemente. And Brian, I am honored to be with you today because you are a person who doesn't just talk about the problems. You actually are out there, boots on the ground, taking action, and you have been doing some rallies and in-person events, and I can't wait to hear all about it. We're going to answer any questions you have regarding laws and anything you have, and so that people can learn as well as we talk about these issues. So tell us about your background and how you've been interested in fighting for our rights these last many months.
Well, I guess my background is that I'm a biomedical engineer. My wife and I founded a contract research organization about 20 years ago, and we specialize in managing clinical trials. So as a result of that, we read a lot of the scientific literature. And so when I was at the Board of Supervisors meeting a couple of weeks ago, where we gave very, very short talks, all 250 of us had 30 seconds each, if you recall. I simply said that my name is Dr. Brian Murphy, co-founder of a contract research organization in Irvine, California, that specializes in management of clinical trials, including vaccine trials. And because we've read a lot of scientific literature, we're convinced that the vaccine for COVID-19 is not safe, not ready, and therefore we asked the Board of Supervisors to pass a resolution to never mandate the vaccine. 30 seconds, time's up, done. That was it. Many other people followed. Another little event that happened on Friday, June 4th, I got a cold call from another patriot, Carol Ann Blankfield, up in Orange County, asking me to participate at a protest for a vaccine clinic that was being set up at St. Boniface Catholic Church in Anaheim, California. Now, a lot of Catholics were very upset. Why is the church getting involved in this vaccine debate and lending a hand to the pro-vaccine lobby by actually hosting a clinic in their parking lot? So I went up there and I borrowed a speaker box from my good friend Glenn Langor, set up the speaker box at 8:30 in the morning before the clinic started at 9, and was approached by a number of men, including a priest, saying that I could not use the speaker box. Well, we argued about that for about 5 minutes, and eventually I relented. There were 15 people lined up on the sidewalk holding signs exposing all of the dangers of the vaccine and praying the rosary. And so they were not marching around, they were not using loudspeakers, they were quietly praying the rosary. Now, for all my good non-Catholic friends and patriots, I want you to know that praying the rosary is not really praying to Mary, it's praying to God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And it invokes all the images of Christ and his life, his birth, his death, his resurrection, his ascension into heaven. And it's a mixture of meditation on all of those mysteries, and therefore it's considered to be the most powerful prayer in the Catholic Church. So you had 15 people doing this. Well, I joined them for a little while, and then the clinic started at 9 o'clock, and I decided to begin intercepting people who were walking from the parking lot over to the clinic. And my plan was simply to momentarily stop them and say, are you aware that there's 60 scientists that have called for a cessation to the whole vaccine program because of the dangerous side effects? Are you aware that the spike protein has now been implicated in causing blood clots and platelet aggregation? And if they said that they were aware and went on to sign up for the clinic, that was fine. I didn't interfere with them in any way whatsoever. Interestingly, almost every person I spoke to was Hispanic. And interestingly, I happened to be fluent in Spanish, and so I was able to play a role in talking to these people. Some of them got turned away, and there was some other Spanish, there was a Spanish doctor lady there who turned some people away. But a lot of people didn't really care about our objections and didn't care about the signs and went and signed up. So then all of a sudden, a man comes over to myself and another lady and says, here's the story. Unless you leave, you're going to be arrested for trespassing. The police have already arrived. And so we tried to dissuade that idea by saying we're just giving out information. We're just using our freedom of speech to express the opposite side of the story and give people valuable information to help them make a decision. We're not interfering. That doesn't matter. And that doesn't matter. If you don't leave, you're going to be arrested. Well, not being completely sure of what my legal position was on a church parking lot in terms of public accommodation, I said, fine, I will leave, but I'm putting you on notice that you are supporting tyranny. And then I went back to my car, signaled to the other people who were praying that I had been asked to leave or threatened with arrest, and then drove home. Well, on the way home, I get a call. So I pull over to the side of the freeway, and it's one of my contacts, Steve Lemire, who says they shut down the clinic. Hallelujah. So that's the power of prayer, and that's the power of protest. Now, we don't really know for sure why they shut down the clinic. There's a number of possible theories. One is they sensed that there was too many people being turned away, and they had too much vaccine exposed to room temperature, and we're going to lose the vaccine, and therefore they felt maybe they had to re-refrigerate it in order to save the vaccine for another occasion. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that the parish just felt that there was too much division, too much turmoil, too much opposition, and didn't want to cause further division or even possibly risk a civil lawsuit, and so they just shut the whole thing down. Doesn't matter. It got shut down. Power of prayer and power of protest. Small victory, not a really big deal, but it was a small victory, and there's some lessons learned here. And this is why I wanted to talk to you, Peggy, because I realized afterward that I needed to brush up on my legal standing. So I went to the healthyamerican.com website and looked up public accommodation. And you've got a beautiful description on your website of all the rules of public accommodation. And so it says that churches are generally not considered to be public accommodation unless they are being rented out for some other public purpose. And that's a very important exception because that was exactly what was taking place on the church parking lot. The clinic was being opened to the public, as was the parking lot. So I probably could have stood my ground if I had known the law a little bit better. Peggy and I had a conversation about this afterwards, and Peggy said, Brian, I think you're right. You probably were in your right, but you would have been arrested anyway. Why don't you explain to the people why that is, Peggy?
Well, I just want to commend you, Brian, because there are so many important points in this story that your experience illustrates. And before I answer that question, I just want to say that you did all of them, and it falls right under what I promoted, the Healthy American, which is connection. You guys connected with each other. You made some phone calls. You heard about a situation that was going on. And so being connected with others is very powerful. You reached out to me. We're connecting now. We're reaching other people. So folks that are listening, I really want to make sure that you underline and highlight and amplify this simple action of being connected with what I call life-minded people, people who are focused on life. And the other thing Brian did is he got educated. He asked some questions. Where is this going to be? Who's going to be there? And then you did some research about the public accommodation. So educating yourself on the facts, digging deeper. You placed a phone call to see if you could get more info. And I love that. You're a researcher. So that comes as second nature for you, likely. For many people, it's not that way. They accept what is told to them. They just will receive all of the input that's coming in without assessing it or evaluating it or determining whether it's accurate or false or if there's evidence or not. And I think this point has to really be magnified. Friends, even what I'm telling you and Brian's telling you, you want to do your further research, and you can do it. You don't need to say, well, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher. That's okay. You have a curious mind. You can dig deeper. You can go beneath the headlines. Dr. Brian, I had people emailing me headlines from the EEOC saying that the EEOC said that businesses can mandate vaccines. The people didn't even read the second paragraph, which states that the businesses must allow for exemptions. So if they had even read beyond the headline, it didn't even take any research other than reading farther, so and then a little bit deeper. So
well, there's an even more basic law than that. Under the quote emergency use authorization, which you've all heard about, one of the primary factors in that is that anybody has a right to refuse.
That's right.
Anybody has a right to refuse. Now, in 1905, there was a tremendous case before the Supreme Court of the United States in which a man tried to get the Supreme Court to prevent the government from forcing him to take the smallpox vaccine. He lost. And so since then, 1905, 1906 was around there, the government has the authority to force vaccines. They have that authority, but not under the emergency use authorization. They can't do it. So because of the tremendous amount of work that many people still feel needs to be done to prove that the vaccine is safe, most people who are like me, who are very suspicious, especially suspicious of the CDC, and very suspicious of anything that the government wants to force down our throat, I say, no, I'm not getting vaccinated. My wife's not getting vaccinated. We refuse. And just like we refuse to wear masks. And I think, Peggy, you've probably talked about this a lot with your listeners before. This is a prelude to the mark of the beast. I'm convinced of it.
Well, that is basically it, Brian. And there's a conditioning through the masks and through, again, people just receiving information without sifting through it and all of that. You know, I studied that case, that 1905. And what was interesting in that is that it was actually brought before the court. And the issue, my reading of it, my interpretation of it was that it was more so the question was whether this was a federal government issue or a state issue. And the court ruled that it was actually a state issue. And that is part of what put into motion that every state, it's not entirely, but it reinforces the idea that the state has authority over public health and not the federal government. The federal government only has authority over who enters the United States or who travels from state to state on a conveyance. So me in a private car has nothing to do with the federal government. I can get in my car and drive to New York and the federal government can do nothing about it. But if I'm coming from another country, even if I'm an American, because they are charged with keeping, you know, the country safe at a federal level, they have that authority. I do want to make a mention that there is no federal law that requires anybody to wear a mask on any public transportation. That was another idea that was floated, and it's a temporary CDC order. The CDC has no authority to issue an order. That Health and Human Services Secretary does, and they illegally, unlawfully delegated that to the CDC. So that in and of itself would not be held up in court. But even if it was, it is only a temporary order. It is not a federal law. I had somebody from Southwest Airlines who is a flight attendant email me, and she said, Peggy, it makes me sick because they give me a script to read and I have to say that the federal law requires you to wear a mask. And I know that's not true. And I said, no, it's not true. It's a temporary order. And I've done a letter writing campaign, and I hope people will help me to approach the airlines because it just bothers me. On a side note, we did get those vaccine signs down off the freeway again in Orange County, and hopefully all over California. We had a letter writing campaign, and I have all of that at the healthyamerican.org, friends, where you write They are acting outside of their bounds of authority. The highway signs can only be about road hazards. Otherwise, they need to remain dark. So after our letter writing campaign of about 3 days, I noticed that the signs were dark, or they were just talking about road closures. Although today I saw a sign that said, flex your power and reduce energy usage from 6 to 9 p.m. That has no place on a federal highway. That has nothing to do, or a state highway, that has nothing to do with safety.
Right.
But I do want to mention one other thing about that 1905 case. The court ruled that it was a state issue, not a federal issue. I think that's a good ruling. I'm in favor of that. Further, it said that the state had the right to issue a fine because there was some type of order or ordinance or something. And so the man did pay $5, but he did not get vaccinated. So I just want to underline that point of the story, that he still refused it and he paid his $5. And we have to continue to fight that, because there is a law in California that says, the health and safety code, that no one can be coerced into participating in a medical experiment. The mask is a medical experiment. The COVID test is a medical experiment. Those are also under an emergency use authorization. I want to ask you a couple more questions, Brian, but I also want to finish up this thread that you connected with your colleagues, you were educated on what was going on, and you took action. And your action was peaceful, and it was lawful, and it was in your rights. And you asked me, would I have been given a charge of trespassing if I didn't leave the property? Let me answer this for everybody. This is what I think is really important. Friends, in the state of California, and really in every state, and we have done the research for you. We have all of the state laws at thehealthyamerican.org. We've got pages and pages of laws that protect your rights from being trampled on in terms of being discriminated against. We also explain what the trespassing laws are in your state, and other laws that might be broken when people are trying to enforce you to do these medical interventions, like the needle, the test, or the mask. You have the right of no consent to all of them. And I also would like to say, I would use the word I decline. And the reason I would use the word decline rather than refuse is because to refuse, I'm an English teacher, so refuse has within that word that you are not doing something that you're supposed to do, right? Like, I refuse to sign that paper. I refuse to do whatever. It inside that word means that you are rejecting something that you're responsible for, or that is an obligation. Please don't use the word refuse. I would use the word I decline. You're declining an offer. The offer is, would you like to have this injection? And your answer is, I decline the offer. We need to remove all of these medical interventions and options and leave them as they are, as an option. They're not required and you're not obligated to do it. It also, refusal is a very belligerent kind of stance. Not that there won't be a time when you actually are refusing something, but I think it's extremely important that we pay attention to the language. And so I decline, and I do not consent. I think I don't consent is a very good word, but to say I refuse means I'm not honoring an obligation. That's how I see it. So when we talk about this situation of trespassing, everybody, this is the key. You are not trespassing if you are in a place of public accommodation, which is a private business, which is a bank, the court, the DMV, a park, a library, a hotel, a grocery store, a chocolate shop, a jewelry store, a nail salon, a hair salon, any place that does commerce that you can give money to in exchange for goods or a service is considered a place of public accommodation. Now, Brian brought such an interesting view, because typically churches and synagogues and mosques and temples are not considered a public accommodation. Number one, you're not buying anything. You're not interacting in commerce. You might donate some money, but you are there not for the purpose of engaging in commerce. Secondly, they may restrict who they invite into their establishment, and that's protected by law. So a an Islamic mosque by law can exclude me, and I don't have any recourse by law. I'm not saying they do, and I'm not saying I agree with the principle, but I'm telling you what the law states. So the law states that an Islamic mosque may restrict anybody from coming in, and a church may restrict anyone from coming in. I don't think they do, but they could. And a temple and any place of worship has the legal authority to exclude members of the public if they don't want them in. You may or may not think that's a good idea. I'm just explaining the law. However, and here's where Brian remembered the caveat, if that place of worship is renting out the room, or it is otherwise engaged in an activity that is open to the public, then it is considered a place of public accommodation. So, for example, if the church rents out a room for, a 12-step recovery program comes in on Saturdays and they use the church area, well, now it is no longer now it's considered a public accommodation. If there is a performance and it's open to the public where, people are doing a theater performance or something and they're using that, or there's a ladies' tea and it is open to the public, then they may not discriminate. So what Brian is stating, and it's a very accurate observation, this church opened its facilities to the public for the purpose of getting the needle further, Brian. I don't have evidence, but my understanding of this is in Orange County, correct?
That's right. And with a sign in the driveway advertising open clinic, vaccine clinic.
Further, I believe that they were paid by the County of Orange, because the County of Orange, at the meetings we've been attending, they have a contract whereby they are going to pay churches and other places, schools are also part of the government.
It's somewhat speculative, and I don't think it really matters.
It doesn't.
I don't think it matters whether they're paid or not. They may have decided to just offer it, free of charge. But
That's right.
The thing that makes it public is that it was open to the public with a sign addressing the public, come here for a vaccine.
That's right. So there will probably be more of these protests, peaceful protests. And so I want to make sure that everybody's clear on the protocol. The first thing I would do is I would call law enforcement who has the jurisdiction in that area. So let's say the next time you go to Buena Park or you go to Garden Grove or Huntington Beach, wherever you are, in advance, this is what I would do. And this is what I have done. So we had our Thanksgiving gathering in Laguna Niguel last year, and we had about 200 or 300 people that all came. And before I held that, it was right in the middle of the lockdown. I don't like to use that word. It was right in the middle of the shutdown. And first of all, I called the city and I said, is the park going to be open on Thanksgiving? And they said, yes, it is. I said, are the bathrooms going to be open? Yes, they are. Is the parking lot going to be open? Yes, it is. Do I need to do any kind of permit? Oh, we are not doing permits. And I'm like, oh, perfect. Okay. So I called in advance and I knew that it was open. And then I called the sheriff and I said, I'm planning a gathering in Laguna Niguel on Thanksgiving, and I want to know if there's going to be any problem. And they said, the Orange County Sheriff is not enforcing COVID restrictions. And I said, okay, but I'm having more than one household and I'm going to have a few hundred people. And the Orange County Sheriff is not responding to any requests for COVID restrictions. The only time the sheriff will be on the scene is if there is a threat to life or property. We are only sending out sheriff deputies if there is a risk of harm to a person or a property. Other than that, we are not enforcing any restrictions. We're not enforcing any curfews. We're not enforcing limits of people. We're not enforcing masks. We're not enforcing distancing, nothing. I said, thank you very much. And do you know, at that, I can't remember, Brian, if you came to that gathering or not, if you were there for Thanksgiving.
Not that particular one. No.
Okay. The sheriff did arrive, but he was sitting in a patrol car, almost like for our protection. We brought him food on a plate in his car. So we had no problem whatsoever. Now, afterwards, the evildoers that didn't like that I had defied the nonsense, tried to be rabble rousers, and they called the city and they protested at the city. So the city sent me a letter saying, you didn't get a permit to have, you're supposed to have a permit if you had more than 100 people or something. And I said, I called the city and they said that they were not doing permits. So I interpreted it as that I didn't need a permit. So anyway, it all worked out fine. There was no problem whatsoever. But what I did is I did it in advance. So I would call and say, under what circumstances would you issue would you arrest someone for trespassing? Now, let me explain this also. In California, the trespassing law is 602, Penal Code 602. Remember, penal code means it's a crime that you broke the law and you have to pay. You have to pay for it with money, or you have to pay for it with time in jail. That's what a penalty. All right. A civil code is it's still a violation of the law, but it usually does not include jail time. It usually includes just monetary damages. So that there's civil law and then there's penal codes. And the penal code for trespassing, 602, says that you can only be charged with trespassing if you are there unlawfully, and it does not apply to a public accommodation. It says that in the law, that it does not apply to a public accommodation. Now, if you were there unlawfully, Brian, if you were slashing people's tires and throwing rocks through the window, and they told you to leave and you didn't, and you kept throwing rocks, now that would be a valid charge of trespassing because they've asked you to leave the property and they have the right to ask you to leave. And you also are impeding, this is the word you were using also, impeding the conduct of business. Now, tell everybody that's listening how you conducted your protest, because you told me you did not impede anyone's entry.
No, that's right. And not physically, or, stopping the person to talk for 30 seconds couldn't be construed as impeding, because if they wanted to keep going, they could keep going. But they voluntarily chose to stop to listen to me. And I made a point of not making it too long so that it could be construed as impeding. All of this information, Peggy, that you're providing is extremely important and very timely. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be a vaccine clinic at St. Mary's Church in Escondido. And I happen to know that there's already people organizing to protest at that location. So I'm going to be sure that they get a link to this video because I think it's very useful information.
Okay, let me answer and go step by step. Number one, I would check with law enforcement and I would inform them. I would say, we are going to be there peacefully. We are doing a peaceful protest, which is under our rights, our constitutional rights of California and the US Constitution. There are additional personal rights that you are protected by in California. So that also includes California Civil Code 51. You have the right to be at any of these locations without denial of access and without denial of entry. So that's California Civil Code 51. Because the church is now open to the public, they're inviting the public to come be a part of this clinic. So now it no longer is under that category of not fitting into the public accommodation. An example would be also your private home is considered not a public accommodation. You have the right to tell people to leave their shoes off and don't smoke inside your home, and you can keep your door closed. You don't have to let anyone in that you don't want to. That's easy for us to relate to. That's our home. But if you had something like an open house, you were selling your house and you had an open house, you would really, by law, you could not keep out anybody because of the color of their skin, or if they were in a wheelchair. You would have to allow the people in a wheelchair and the people with a turban on their head, you would have to allow them to come into the open house because you have opened your home to the public. So I just want to get a very clear picture. The church has now opened itself to the public. Therefore, it must be under the public accommodation laws, which say that everyone has the right to be there and you are not guilty of trespassing if you are there lawfully and if it is a public accommodation. Now, what I also want to say is this: the church representative may ask you to leave, and I would bring the card from the website, that number 5 under documents, where it clearly states that you have the right to be there. And there are about 5 or 6 laws, maybe even more, that I have written out. And you could present them with that. Another thing might be, and I don't know if you want to do this as a surprise or not, but you might contact, and I know it's tomorrow morning, but you might contact the church in advance and say, we are going to be there peacefully. It is our right. We're not going to impede the flow. We are there to do education and to, um, give information to those who may need it. And so that, I think what happens, Brian, is people get caught off guard and then they get very defensive. So you show up, they're not expecting you, and then they don't know what to do. They're scurrying around. But if you were to alert them now and say, I just want to let you know that I'm giving you notice that these are laws that you are required to abide by. And if you don't, we will be putting a charge on you. And what happens is when an individual calls the police for a trespass, that is considered a personal charge, a personal arrest. It's called a citizen's arrest in California. And Brian, you have the right to make a citizen's arrest. It actually is all spelled out in the law. And you have to, first of all, see that this violation is occurring with your own eyes. And you have the right to tell the person, I'm going to call the cops because I can see you violating the law. It even states that you have the right to restrain the person if you think they are going to be a risk of injury to you or to others. I wouldn't recommend this because it could backfire, like putting somebody in a closet and locking it. I wouldn't do that. But you do have the right by law. Let's say somebody had a knife and they were, threatening people, and 4 or 5 of you guys tackled him and put him locked him in a car or something. It could backfire because that could be illegal restraint and, false imprisonment and all that, illegal kidnapping and all that. So personally, I wouldn't do it unless life was at risk. One might argue life is at risk in this vaccine clinic. I would agree with you there. But when a person who owns the property says, we are asking you to leave, and if you don't leave, even though you're there lawfully, chances are, if you've not cleared this with the police or anything, they probably will give you a warning. And if you don't leave, then they will consider that they gave you fair warning, and then they will arrest you. I've seen it time and time again. I've seen it on innocent bystanders standing outside of a grocery store on the sidewalk. And they were just literally sideswiped by the police and, handcuffed before they even knew what was happening. So it just depends on that. Now, some people, probably including yourself, because I know that you're a man of very strong conviction, some people wouldn't mind that. They would not mind taking it that far and having that be a visible example of the depth of their conviction. Everybody makes that decision for themselves. Not everybody wants to spend time in jail or have to pay the bail or have to have the consequences of what that requires. Some people will, some people won't. I'm not passing, everybody makes that own decision on their own. What I do is offer the information. So the main thing in all of these protests is to, maintain your dignity and your integrity, so that people will actually listen and hear, because some people are very turned off by anybody it's just my impression, that's too belligerent. Just the same thing like at abortion clinics. There are people that can be very militant, and then there are people that are very compassionate. And you have to determine what is going to work best with your audience. I think handing out little flyers with the information is excellent. There's always going a little bit further away before people enter the actual location. And then you're not at a threat of being trespassed because you're not on their property. If you're on a street corner, nobody can say anything to you, because that is definitely, you're not on anybody's private property. So those are my tips. Contact the place you're going to protest. Contact the law enforcement to clear it up. Make sure that you're not impeding any flow of business, and then determine how far you want to take it. And you know what I wish, Brian? I wish that some people did take it all the way to court, because then they could have the judge actually adjudicate the dispute. And you can say, Your Honor, the law says that I was at a place of public accommodation and I was not impeding business. So how could I possibly be guilty of this violation? I would be curious to see what the judge would say.
Well, I'm pretty sure the case will be thrown out. But like you say, Peggy, everybody's got to make their own decision. For me, I don't really want to waste a day in jail.
Yeah.
And so, and I would probably uh, myself, I would probably back down. Maybe that makes me a coward, but then I go on and continue to do other things.
That's right. I feel the same way. I've said many times that there may be a day and time for that action. It hasn't occurred for me yet. I've
Yeah,
had some
it has
very
to be a much
uncomfortable,
bigger issue. The issue here is pretty big, but it would have to be even bigger.
because then it can hamstring you from doing additional work, if you're in jail and so forth. But everybody makes their own decision. I know plenty of people that got um, completely kind of hoodwinked and out of the blue were arrested and taken to jail. They didn't even realize what was happening. And at the end of the day, they were like, you know what, I'm glad I did that, because now I know what it's like to be arrested and to be in jail. And I've had this experience, and I can speak from it, and I came out all right. But you're a single mom of kids and they put you in jail, they're going to take your kids. So you really have to think these things through. And I agree, Brian. I'm not putting any judgment on any of that. People decide for themselves when and where and how that day might be. And I'm sure I thought it was going to be at the Board of Supervisors last meeting when they pulled out that talking point that we had all shown up to protest their desire to limit our speech by having a spokesperson for us. I mean, that was astonishing. And then they knew they didn't want us to speak about it. And I felt a little hot under the collar that day, but there were no altercations, and we will continue to fight that legally, lawfully. And what do you say for people now? You've been going to these board meetings, Brian, and you're active in these protests and things. Would you care to share for people who have never done anything like this, who are kind of complaining and being upset, but they've never done something yet? Could you offer some words of advice?
Well, everything that I've done so far, and it's been really small compared to what other people have done, but everything I've done, I've found to be very informative. I've always wanted to be involved in the political process, and every experience at Huntington Beach Pier was informative. And shook hands with some Black Lives Matter people, and talk with them, and interact with the opposition a little bit. It's very informative. I find it enlightening. The Board of Supervisors meeting, I think, would be improved if they would say that we're going to allow so many people to speak, and we'll give them 5 minutes if they're speaking for a group. This we used to do previously in Mission Viejo when we were protesting a construction of a parking lot in Mission Viejo. And it was very courteous, and we made those kind of agreements with City Council, and it worked very, very well. I would speak for 5 minutes. Somebody else might even speak for 10 minutes. And if they knew ahead of time that that person was representing 20 or 30 or 50 people, then the councilors were very amenable to that kind of an arrangement. And I think that makes democracy work better. This 200 people times 30 seconds, I pity the supervisors that had to sit through that.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting comments came from um, someone who gave their testimony, and he said, supervisors, if you would like to reduce the number of comments, do your job better, and people won't come here to have these comments. And I also think if they allowed anyone to yield their time, and then it was done the way you're saying. So for example, if there were 10 of us and we all said, I yield my time, then it's done again with the authenticity and the authority in the people. What bothers me about this is that they want to change these things willy-nilly, and before you know it, they may say, well, there's one person who gets 30 seconds to speak for 10 people. Well, that's not good either. So
Right.
I think the yielding of time makes perfect sense, because it's an individual choice that we are doing with each other. And I think that's actually something very important to propose.
Well, the next time that there is a big issue at the Board of Supervisors meeting, the people who are leaders in all of this, you and people like Lee Dundas and others, should probably try to arrange that, because there are some very articulate people that can represent a large number of people, and I think it would make it a better experience for everybody.
Well, I'm hoping that they're listening, and that my view is, even regardless of the result, the fact that the people are coming together, we're making connections, we're showing that we're there, they know that we're listening, and those are very powerful statements. Even if someone is hemming and hawing and not really as articulate, they know that they took that time off of work and they drove there, and they're there, or set aside whatever they were doing, and it is having an impact. I do believe that, and I want to encourage folks to do what you're doing, which is standing for what you believe in. It's really important. Brian, we're going to continue our conversation. We are going to stop the stream on Facebook. Anybody who would like to see this full interview, it will be airing at peggyhall.tv. There are some things I want to talk to Dr. Brian about in terms of clinical trials.
Oh,
And
just call me Brian.
I know. You're just the best. And I would like to hear from you a little bit more about the clinical trials and your view about the vaccine and all of that. We cannot really talk about that at length on the public platform. So thank you, everybody who is here with us. And Dr. Brian Murphy is a research scientist, a clinical scientist, and a fellow freedom fighter. And he runs clinical trial laboratories. And so he's very well versed in this. And he has made a number of very important appearances in front of the county boards and at other rallies. So if you're in Orange County, look for a tall, distinguished gentleman and you will see him. And in the meantime, I hope to see you over at peggyhall.tv.
Good work, Peggy.
Well,
Good
we're
Lord.
still here. Thank you. And Brian, we are going to talk a little bit more here just for another 10 minutes or so for our audience at peggyhall.tv. Now, they are going to be so interested in your position as a research scientist and the things that you've been saying about these vaccines have not gone through the trials. Can you tell us, from your years of experience running clinical trials, what's missing here and why should we be concerned?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say that it's very controversial even among scientists. Another event took place last night, Peggy. There was a webinar held in Orange County, moderated by Bishop Tim Fryer, a very likable, well-known bishop, very soft-spoken and very friendly, and hosted by a couple of other pediatrician doctors. And it was a 1-hour webinar, completely one-sided, completely pro-vaccine, completely geared toward providing information that supports the use of the vaccine. And all the information they provided was scientifically correct. I'm not saying that this was erroneous propaganda. It was not. It was a very best effort from some medical professionals to convince people that taking the vaccine is going to help us to get to herd immunity. It's going to reduce the number of children that land up in the hospital with respiratory stress syndrome and inflammation and so on and so forth. And therefore, be a good citizen and go and get the vaccine. There was nobody there from frontline doctors. There was no countervailing view. There was no discussion of the dangerous side effects and the frequency of occurrence of the side effects. None of that. So suffice to say that among good, well-meaning scientists, there's a severe difference of opinion on the vaccine. Now, so you asked me what my opinion is, and I'll tell you why I don't like it. I don't like the fact that the last time I checked, there was 4,500 deaths reported to the vaccine adverse event reporting system. It's probably gone up since I last looked. It's probably up around 5,000 now. And this is what is supposed to happen. This I can tell you with authority managing clinical trials. When there is an adverse event, and an adverse event means any event that causes something severe to happen, like the person is injured, hospitalized, has to take emergency medication, has to take any kind of emergency treatment. Doesn't have to be life-threatening to be an adverse event. A serious adverse event doesn't have to be life-threatening either. It can be. And whenever that occurs, particularly with a serious adverse event, there has to be an investigation. So let's say, for example, the person died and it looked like he had a heart attack. And so it gets reported to the vaccine adverse event reporting system. The person died. He just got the vaccine a couple of weeks ago, but we think he died of a heart attack. Well, maybe he just did die of a heart attack. Maybe it was just a completely coincidence. But if you did an examination and you found blood clots all throughout his vasculature in his legs, then you'd say, hey, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. This person has no history of cardiac disease, no history of myocardial infarction, no history of blood disorders, and yet we find his body is full of blood clots. So you have to do an analysis of every case to establish whether or not it was a coincidental death or a vaccine-related death. And there's 4 categories, or 5. Not related to the vaccine, possibly related to the vaccine, probably related to the vaccine, or related to the vaccine. 4 categories. And related means that there's just overwhelming evidence. For example, the person got the shot, 15 minutes later, they developed an anaphylactic reaction and they died. That's, most certainly related to the vaccine. So you can see that there's a gradation of probabilities here as to whether it's related or not related to the vaccine. My beef is this: we have not seen any published reports on the internet of 4,500 clinical analyses of those 4,500 people who have died.
That's
as far
amazing.
as I know, they're non-existent.
That's amazing, Brian. I did not realize that they had to investigate all of those.
But think about this. They don't even have the manpower to investigate, because it would take anywhere from 4 to 8 hours to investigate one case. Okay, so you'd need 4,500 investigators to do it all in a day. Divide that by 30 to do it in 30 days, and so you still need 500 investigators. They don't have 500 investigators. So what's happening is, what has to be happening, I deduce, is that they're quickly rubber stamping and they're just saying, not related, not related, not related, not related. And then saying, the quote is, the benefits are greater than the risks. And that is a value judgment. There is no scientific criteria, unfortunately, to really make that judgment. So as a scientist, I can't say to another scientist, you're wrong and I'm right. I can only say to another scientist who disagrees with me, I disagree with your evaluation and I'm going to go by my evaluation. You see, so this is the problem we have, is that there's no clear or right or wrong scientific answer as to whether these deaths and blood disorders, blood clots, and so forth are related to the vaccine. And even if you say that they are all related to the vaccine, then the pro-vaccine group is still going to come out and say, well, we inoculated 100 million people and we only got 5,000 deaths. That's insignificant. They're going to say, no problem. Even though that number of deaths is greater than all the deaths reported for every vaccine in the world for the last 10 years.
Wow, that's just astonishing.
So we're in a scientific conundrum here, is my opinion.
That is really a powerful statement, Brian. And I want to mention one thing here. You said you can only say that you disagree with the person's evaluation or interpretation and so forth. And that's so true. And they are trying to shut down any opposing view or evidence or interpretation. And that is very, very dangerous, whether it's on science, whether it's on an interpretation of the law or of one's opinion or choice. That, to me, I think that is the most harmful side effect, or maybe it's not even a side effect. Maybe that was the main effect they wanted, was to silence people. And
this is what just reinforces people like you and me to be really, really skeptical. Because when you have good, well-minded people supported by the Bishop of Orange who's saying that the vaccine is wonderful, it's all these other stories of information manipulation and so forth that make you and I, Peggy, very skeptical.
Yeah, and then as you say, the pro-vax will use information and data and manipulate it. And I've seen things, Brian, when they were talking about the flu vaccine, and it says, oh, the flu vaccine prevented X number of flu cases. Like, how, you have no way of knowing that. And then it says, oh, and it also short, even if you get the flu, it'll be of a shorter duration. Well, how do you know? How do you know how long I would have been sick if I didn't take it? And maybe if I hadn't had it, I wouldn't have gotten sick at all. So the data is so corrupted. How can they even say that a number of cases were prevented? Do they have a crystal ball? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me.
That's right. Well, you're absolutely right. They don't have all these answers. And so you've got 70 scientists now, 70, that are saying this program should be stopped. Now, these are scientists who are in the vaccine business. They understand vaccines. They know vaccines. They know, they're doctors. And they're saying, stop. But the power of Fauci et al. Is greater.
Yeah, it's quite troubling here. Brian, we're going to be wrapping up in the next minute or so. I do have another interview, but I want everybody to know where they can reach you. You have a website.
Yes, it's called godsplanforlife.org. That's godsplanforlife.org. And we've got lots of good articles on there. My main ministry is to the church, to Christians in the church, to clergy in the church, to lead the way in a more powerful and more convincing manner.
Oh, I just love that, Brian. You've been such a powerful force. I'm so glad that we've gotten to know each other and had these interactions over the last many months. And it's always nice to see you there. I can see you. You know, you're tall and statuesque, and you're such a grounding presence for us all in these meetings. And I think that the light of Christ does shine through you. You are preceding everything with truth. I love the name of your website, God's Plan for Life. If we just follow that, and anyone who's listening, if you're unsure about that, God himself will show you. You follow him and he will show you the path. That is guaranteed. And I think that's
a young man just yesterday, seek and you shall find. Knock and the door will be open for you. For the man who seeks finds, and the man who knocks will have the door opened.
I love that.
Folks, if you're looking for the Lord, look and seek and you will find him.
And that's where Brian, that's where we get our strength and our confidence to keep moving forward. I know people say, oh, you're so brave. It's like, oh no, it's not me. It's a supernatural strength or power. And I just follow where I am led. So I'm grateful for that direction and protection and peace. And keep me posted. I will send you the video and then keep me posted on how things go with the protest. And I'm so glad that that I'm able to offer some assistance there.
Can I get the link off of San Clemente Freedom Group right now?
What I will do, it'll take a little bit, Brian, for me to just upload this. So I will get that to you probably within the hour as it downloads, and then I will have a link for you for that.
You'll email it to me, huh?
I will email that to you as soon as I can.
Super.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, take care now.
Talking to you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.